Sure. Arthur adjusted the lens of his camera, focusing on the vibrant red maple leaf in the foreground. Hold that pose, Clara, he said, a smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. The light is perfect right here. He waited for her laugh, the soft, familiar sound that had been the soundtrack of his life for 40 years. But there was no laugh. There was no rustle of fabric. There was no breath. Arthur lowered the camera, expecting to see her tying her shoe or admiring the view. Instead, he saw only the endless, towering trunks of the poplar trees and a sudden, creeping fog that hadn't been there 10 seconds ago. "Clara," he whispered. The silence of the Smokies was his only reply. The Great Smoky Mountains are often called the place of blue smoke by the ancient people who first walked these ridges. It is a land of breathtaking beauty, where the mist rises from the valleys like a living, breathing entity, wrapping the peaks in a soft, eternal embrace. But for those who know the history of these woods, the mist is not just beautiful. It is a curtain, a veil that separates the known world from something much older, much quieter, and much more unforgiving. For Arthur and Clara, the mountains were not a place of fear, but a sanctuary. They had met 40 years ago in a small diner just outside of Gatlinburg, and every year since, they returned to the trails to celebrate the life they had built together. They were not thrill seekers. They were not looking to conquer peaks or set records. They were simply two souls deeply in love, looking for the peace that only the deep woods can provide. It was mid-October, the time of year when the Appalachians put on their most spectacular show. The canopy was a burning quilt of ochre, crimson, and gold. The air was crisp, smelling of damp earth and pine needles. Arthur drove their old station wagon up the winding roads toward Cade's Cove, his hand resting gently on Clara's knee. They spoke about their children, now grown and moved away. Spoke about the leaking roof they needed to fix before winter. They spoke about everything and nothing, the comfortable conversation of two people who know each other's thoughts before they are even spoken. They parked the car at a trailhead that was less popular than the others. They preferred the solitude. Clara tightened the laces of her hiking boots, the same pair she had worn for a decade. Sheila adjusted her scarf, a bright red wool knit that Arthur had given her for Christmas years ago. "Ready, old Matt?" she teased, her eyes sparkling with that youthful energy that Arthur adored. "Always," he replied. They walked hand in hand for the first mile, the trail wide and inviting. The sun filtered through the leaves, creating a mosaic of light on the forest floor. They stopped often. Arthur was an amateur photographer, obsessed with capturing the perfect lighting of the Appalachian autumn. Clara was a botanist at heart, stopping to inspect ferns and mushrooms, marveling at the resilience of life in the undergrowth. Everything was perfect. It was the kind of day you dream about in the dead of winter. The kind of day where the world feels safe, structured, and kind. But the mountains are indifferent to our happiness. The mountains do not care about anniversaries. They simply exist, vast and ancient, and sometimes they take what is theirs. Around 2 in the afternoon, the atmosphere began to shift. It wasn't a storm, exactly. It was something more subtle. The birds, which had been singing a chorus all morning, slowly fell silent. The wind, which had been gently rustling the leaves, died down completely. A heavy stillness settled over the woods, a silence so profound it felt like pressure in the ears. Arthur was walking a few paces ahead, distracted by a hawk circling high above the canopy. He stopped to switch lenses on his camera, fumbling with the cap. "Clara," he called out, not turning around yet. "Look at this hog. I think it's a tell." He waited for her response. Surely, she would be right there, her hand on his shoulder, peering up with him. He heard the snap of a twig behind him. "Clara," he said again. He turned around. The trail behind him was empty. He frowned, a small knot of confusion forming in his stomach. "Clara, stop hiding," he said, forcing a chuckle. "We're too old for hide and seek." Scanned the trees. To his left, the slope went up steeply, covered in dense rhododendrons. To his right, the ground fell away into a small ravine filled with ferns. "Clara!" He shouted louder this time. His voice didn't echo. It seemed to be absorbed by the moss and the bark, swallowed instantly by the vastness of the forest. He walked back 10 yards. Then 20. He reached the spot where he thought he had last seen her, near a large moss-covered boulder. There was nothing. No footprints in the soft dirt, other than his own boot marks. No broken branches. It was as if she had simply evaporated. The panic didn't hit him all at once. It came in waves. First, it was annoyance. She must have stepped off the trail to use the restroom, he thought. She'll be back in a second. He stood there for 5 minutes. Then 10. The silence grew louder. Per se, the fog, which had been hovering on the peaks, began to descend into the valley, gray and thick. It moved unnaturally fast, weaving through the trees like serpentine fingers. Arthur checked his watch. "Las 12:15 p.m. en Clara," he screamed. Her name now. The fear finally breaking through his denial. He ran back down the trail, his heart hammering against his ribs. He ran up the trail. He scrambled down into the ravine, tearing his trousers on thorns, ignoring the sting on his skin. "Answer me, please." But the woods gave nothing back. The fog thickened, reducing visibility to a mere 20 feet. The world had shrunk to a gray, silent circle around him. Arthur stood alone in the wilderness, the camera hanging heavy around his neck. A piece of technology useless against the ancient mystery of the missing. By 4 p.m., the light was beginning to fade. In the mountains, twilight comes early and quickly. The shadows stretched out, distorting the shapes of the trees into twisted figures. Arthur was hoarse from screaming. He had run up and down the same mile of trail a dozen times. He had called 911, but the signal was dead, a mocking no service displaying on his screen. He knew he had to leave to get help, but the thought of leaving her there alone in the growing dark was physically painful. It felt like tearing off a limb. What if she comes back to the trail and I'm gone? He thought. What if she's hurt just a few yards away and I can't see her? He took off his jacket and tied it to a tree branch, a marker. He found a piece of paper in his pocket and scribbled a note with shaking hands. "Clara, I went for help. Stay here. I love you." He pinned it to the tree. Then, with tears blurring his vision, he began the run back to the car. The drive to the ranger station was a blur of terror. He didn't remember the curves of the road or the other cars he passed. He burst into the station, breathless, wild-eyed, looking like a madman. "My wife?" he gasped. "She's gone. She just... ... vanished." The Rangers were professional. They had seen this before. They calmed him down, took the coordinates, and mobilized the team. Within an hour, the trailhead was swarming with activity. Search dogs, flashlights, radios crackling with static. The efficiency of the search and rescue team gave Arthur a glimmer of hope. Surely, with all this technology, with all these people, they would find her. He wanted to go back out with them, but they made him wait by the command center. "You're exhausted, Arthur," the lead ranger said gently. "Let us do our job. We'll find her." Thor sat on the bumper of an ambulance, wrapped in a foil blanket, staring at the black wall of the forest. The woods at night were a different beast entirely. They were a wall of obsidian, impenetrable and cold. He imagined Clara out there. Was she cold? Was she scared? Was she calling his name? The first night passed without a trace. The dogs picked up a scent near the boulder but lost it almost immediately. Confused, spinning in circles as if the scent had just lifted into the air. Day 2 brought volunteers, people from the local towns, hikers who had heard the news, even people driving through who saw the signs. They formed lines, combing through the brush shoulder to shoulder. Arthur walked with them, refusing to sleep, refusing to eat. He called her name until his voice was nothing but a raspy whisper.
They found a candy wrapper, a plastic bottle, a lost sunglasses case, but none of it belonged to Clara. The woods were full of debris from decades of visitors, but of the woman who had walked there 24 hours ago, there was not a single sign. By day 4, the mood shifted. The urgency of rescue began to fade into the somber reality of recovery. The ranger stopped making eye contact with Arthur. They spoke in lower tones. The nights were getting colder, dipping below freezing. A person without shelter, without heavy gear. The odds were dropping with every tick of the clock. Arthur refused to accept it. "She's strong," he told anyone who would listen. "She knows plants. She knows how to hunker down." But deep down, a cold dread was settling in his bones, colder than the mountain air. He replayed that moment over and over. The hawk, the camera lens, de silence. Why didn't I look back sooner? The guilt was a physical weight, crushing his chest. Why was I looking at a bird when I should have been looking at her a week past? The official search was scaled back. The volunteers had to go back to their jobs. The dogs were exhausted. The lead ranger sat Arthur down in the small office, a cup of lukewarm coffee between them. "Arthur," he said, his voice heavy with regret, "we've combed a 10-mile radius. We've used thermal imaging helicopters. We've had divers in the river. There is nothing." "So you're giving up?" Arthur said, his voice flat. "We aren't giving up. But we have to be realistic. The mountains, sometimes they keep things." Arthur went home to an empty house. The silence of the house was different from the silence of the woods, but it was just as deafening. Clara's book was still on the nightstand, a bookmark halfway through. Her coffee mug was in the sink, a faint lipstick stain on the rim. Her smell of ender and old paper lingered in the closet. He didn't move her things. He couldn't. To move them would be to admit she wasn't coming back. He kept her phone charger plugged in. He kept the mail piled on the counter. He became a ghost in his own life, haunting the rooms they had shared. Months turned into seasons. Winter came, burying the Smokies in snow. Arthur imagined the snow covering the trail, covering the boulder, covering whatever secrets lay hidden in the ravine. He spent his days reading maps, studying topography, reading about other disappearances. He learned about the vast cave systems beneath the mountains, the sudden sinkholes, the disorientation that can happen in the dense rhododendron hills. But logic didn't help. Logic couldn't explain how a woman vanishes in 10 seconds on a clear trail. Spring arrived, bringing life back to the world, but not to Arthur. He returned to the trail. He hiked it every weekend. He wasn't searching for her alive anymore, he knew that much. He was searching for something. A shoe, a piece of that red scarf, a bone, anything that would tell him where she went, anything that would let him bring her home. He became a fixture in the park. The rangers knew him. They waved sadly as he passed. "There goes Arthur," they'd say. "Still looking." He would hike off trail, pushing into the deep, dark hollows where tourists never went. He talked to her as he walked. He told her about the grandkids. He told her about the news. E apologised, over and over again. 5 years passed. Then 10. The sharp agony of grief dulled into a chronic, aching throb. Arthur was an old man now. His knees were weak, his eyesight failing. He couldn't hike the deep trails anymore. He had to stick to the paved paths or just sit on the bench at the overlook. One afternoon, in late October almost, exactly 15 years to the day, she vanished. Arthur was sitting on a bench near the visitor center. A young ranger approached him. He held a small plastic bag. "Mr. Arthur?" the ranger asked softly. Arthur looked up. "Yes, some hikers. They were off trail, way up on the ridge, miles from where, ... miles from the search zone. They found something near a fox den." The ranger handed him the bag. Inside, caked with mud, tarnished by time and elements, was a silver locket. Arthur's hands shook violently as he took it. He didn't need to open it to know what was inside. He remembered the day he bought it for her, for their 25th anniversary. He fumbled with the clasp, his arthritic fingers struggling. Finally, it popped open. The photo inside was destroyed by water and time, a blur of colors. But on the opposite side, the engraving was still legible, protected by the metal. "Forever yours." Arthur brought the locket to his lips and wept. He wept for the years lost. He wept for the mystery that would never be fully solved. How did she get there, miles away, up a ridge that was nearly impossible to climb? Did she get lost and walk until she collapsed? Did something chase her? Or did the mountain simply carry her there? They never found her remains. Just the locket, resting on a bed of moss, as if placed there by a gentle hand. The closure wasn't complete. It wasn't an answer, but it was a touch, a final connection across the void. She had been there. She had held this locket. The following week, Arthur drove up to the mountains one last time. He didn't bring his hiking boots. He didn't bring a map. He brought the locket, polished and clean. He walked to the edge of the overlook, staring out at the rolling sea of blue mist that stretched to the horizon. The sun was setting, painting the sky in the same brilliant colors as that day 15 years ago. The beauty was still there, indifferent and overwhelming. "I found you," Arthur whispered to the wind. "And soon I'll be with you." He didn't throw the locket. He placed it in his pocket, close to his heart. He turned his back on the view and walked to his car. For the first time in 15 years, he didn't look back. He knew she wasn't in the woods anymore. She wasn't in the mist. She was waiting for him, somewhere beyond the silence, somewhere where the trails never ended and the fog never obscured the view. The Great Smoky Mountains kept their secret, as they always do. The wind howled through the valley, carrying the scent of pine and old earth, whispering stories to those who stopped to listen. But for Arthur, the silence was no longer empty. It was filled with a promise that nothing is truly lost, only waiting to be found again.